Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue with our discussion of the films that are included in the set, the Criterion release, which is called Eric Rohmer's Six Moral Tales, which is right here. This set is spine number 342. The second film in this cycle of films is designated with the spine number 344. This is from 1963. It is a 55-minute black and white film, and this is called Suzanne's Career. Suzanne's Career, or in French, La Carrière de Suzanne, is, as I say, the second of the six moral tales that are presented by Eric Rohmer. And once again, I don't want to give any specifics of the plot, lest I spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen this film. So if you haven't seen this film, don't worry. I will be as vague and as ambiguous as possible, but also I will try to speak to the film enough to hopefully encourage you, for those of you who haven't seen it, to try to check it out, because it is a fascinating work, again set in the context of these six moral tales. And what we have here, this is the DVD, and it has its own separate casing, and then this is the newer Blu-ray set. So the DVD is unfortunately out of print, but I have it here just for purposes of presentation, just to give you a sense of what the cover is for this particular DVD. Bertrand and Guillaume and Suzanne. So here we have a kind of triangle. Of course, there are other characters that emerge in this particular narrative of Suzanne's career, but in essence we are dealing with a triangle, and we see two young men and one young woman, and they are also young. They are in they are in their sort of early adulthood youth, and this is Paris, or Paris. And so we see once again, just like in the earlier film in the series, The Bakery Girl of Monceau, we do see a kind of a triangle of relationships, and we see this this story play out from the viewpoint of another male narrator. And this time we see this male narrator, and not only his relationship with specific women that emerge in this particular film, Suzanne's Career, but also we see his relationship with another man, and we see how this relationship with his friend, his male friend, how that can also influence or affect the various relationships that the male narrator is trying to explore or understand or try to make sense of within the space and confines of this 55-minute film, the second in the series of Six Moral Tales by Eric Rohmer. And so once again we have a film that centers on a male narrator that is trying to perhaps provide justifications for the types of choices that he makes vis-a-vis his feelings and his attempts at trying to make sense of relationships, both with the women in the story and also his friend, who also has a certain angle when it comes to his own relationships with the same women that we see, that we encounter in this film. And so I think on the one hand we we do get a similar kind of vibe or approach to human relationships that we saw in the earlier work, The Bakery Girl of Monceau, but at the same time we do see some differences. We see the male narrator trying to figure out relationships not only with other women, but also with other men, or one particular man specifically, which is his friend. And so that seems to complicate certain things. We did see other men characters in the earlier film, but I think here we get a more pronounced approach to that kind of dynamic. And also there is a sense of a kind of trying to manipulate or trying to dominate, whether it's said in those words or not. And this is seen as a kind and relationships between men and women. While there are positive aspects that are represented in this particular film, there are also some negative aspects as well that are brought to the fore with respect to the relationships between these young men and these young women. How people try to manipulate certain situations to create jealousies, or how people feel a certain sense of dominance or superiority over others whom they might think to be maybe emotionally inferior, or maybe emotionally ill-equipped to deal with certain situations, and how that kind of feeling of dominance will either push forward with the character's own perceptions of themselves, and how their own perceptions either win out in the end or lose out in the end. And it's along the way how these perceptions of dominance and superiority, how the particular characters, and the male narrator in particular, how he tries to justify those feelings of superiority given the certain situation, and how he tries to either justify it in terms of a sort of a proactive attempt at making kind of connections, or a more passive stance in maybe letting the situation play itself out, and then taking a sort of a step back, but still trying to maintain a sense of superiority or dominance in his own way of viewing the world. I'm talking about the male narrator here. And so already in my attempt at trying to be as vague as possible with respect to Suzanne's career, I think we already get a sense of the kind of the exploration that the film is trying to make vis-a-vis these relationships, but specifically vis-a-vis this particular male narrator's male character's view, his male viewpoint on these particular relationships, and his subjectivity versus the objectivity of the women in question, in particular one woman in question, Suzanne, who is Suzanne's career, the title's namesake. And when we see this film, I think we can also get a sense of the idea of subjectivity and objectivity, subject and object. And when we see the film to its conclusion, we can wonder whether it was indeed the subject, the male narrator, who had a kind of sense of control or superiority over the events, or maybe the tables were turned, and maybe in this interplay, this exchange, this shifting sense of shifting dynamics in the relationships between men and women, or specifically this particular male narrator character and the object Suzanne, how those dynamics shifted in a way that perhaps made the object of the subject's gaze dominant in the end, and I put air quotes in that. And so whether or not that is indeed the case, I think we are left as viewers to decide. But again, I think there's enough room here in terms of how the story progresses and develops to really give us a sense of questioning these viewpoints and these justifications that these men, and in particular this male character, how the kinds of justifications that he is trying to impose, not just on himself, but maybe on the world around him. And whether that is indeed proper or not is, we as viewers, I think, are given enough room to try to think about that and develop that further in our own minds as we watch. And so this is, I think, a very purposeful work in terms of showing us the shifting dynamics, not only between men and women, but also between men and men, and how that can further affect our relationships between men and women, those relationships between men and women, excuse me, and the consequences of our viewpoints and the consequences of the male narrator's viewpoint and his perspective, which led to certain decisions that he made, how those decisions played themselves out, and what were the consequences or ramifications of those, not just on the world and the people around him, but on himself. And thus we are left with a very complex state that we as viewers are lay witness to as the film ends, and we are given, as I say, plenty of room to ponder and to think and to question who indeed was the subject and who indeed was the object, or who indeed was the superior, who is the person in the superior position, and who indeed was the person in the so-called inferior position. And even if those positions don't exist, what is the state of play in terms of the emotional state of being of these characters throughout this film and then at the film's denouement. So once again, there is a lot here to try to digest and try to soak up and to grapple with. It is, I think, on the surface also a very interesting love triangle sort of film, but I think underneath we are given, as I'm trying to suggest here, a lot of room for complexity and nuance and shifting allegiances as we, the viewer, try to make our way through this web, if you will, of, as I say, shifting dynamics in the various relationships that can be had between men and women and men and human being and human being. So this is, again, at the center of this very interesting film, Suzanne's Career, from 1963. So once again, if you haven't seen this film, Suzanne's Career, then I would strongly suggest that you take a look. Now, I should make one point here. This is the second film in the sequence of films called The Six Moral Tales, the first being The Bakery Girl of Monceau. And although there isn't, for the most part anyway, there isn't necessarily any kind of direct narrative linkage between, say, The Bakery Girl of Monceau and Suzanne's Career. In other words, for the most part, because there isn't any direct linkage, these films aren't traditional sequels to each other. One might think that it is okay to watch these films out of order, out of sequence. In other words, one might think that it's okay to watch Suzanne's Career first and then go to My Night at Maud's or The Bakery Girl of Monceau, etc., etc. And I am not here to tell you, to impose upon you any strict order of watching these films. On the contrary, these are films that can freely be seen by you, and so you can choose how and when you watch them. So it's totally up to you. But if you wanted my advice, then I would strongly advise watching the films in order, starting with The Bakery Girl of Monceau and then going to Suzanne's Career. And then after you've finished Suzanne's Career, the next film in the sequence is called My Night at Maud's. And then after that, La Collectionneuse, and then Claire's Knee, and then Love in the Afternoon, which would be the final film in the sequence. And I actually believe that watching them in that order is very beneficial, because one will be able to, I think, identify certain progressions and developments, not only in the ages of the characters, but also in the way in which certain characters seem to be dealing with a similar kind of situation that is slightly different than the scenario that we saw in the film previous, etc. So we might sense similarities, and we also might sense some nuanced differences along the way. And I certainly think that's the case when we go from, say, The Bakery Girl of Monceau to Suzanne's Career. Again, we have triumvirates of characters, but the sexes of the characters are a little bit changed, and also therefore the dynamics of those relationships are also changed. And I think the ultimate results of the male protagonist narrator's attempts at moralizing or justifying those results, while they might seem similar in their efforts, end up, I think, arguably speaking, to lead to different consequences. And so I think this kind of progression, therefore, from the first film to this film, Suzanne's career, I think is a very interesting one and a potentially potent one. So that is my example and my way of trying to suggest that, yes, I think it's very beneficial to watch the films in this designated order. So The Bakery Girl of Monceau first, and then this film, Suzanne's career. And once you finish this, you can move on to the third film, which is My Night at Maud's, which we will be talking about in a subsequent video. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now with respect to a brief conversation about Suzanne's career. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you once again for your time, as always, my friends, and cheers.